Novak.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Poland says a Russian-made missile fell in the eastern part of the country, killing 2 people at a blast that marked the first time in the war with Ukraine that Russian weapons came down on a NATO country. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky decried the strike as a very significant escalation of the war. The Polish government said in a statement its foreign minister summoned the Russian ambassador and demanded immediate detailed explanations. A government spokesman said military units were put on alert while officials sought details. Russia pounded Ukraine's energy facilities with its biggest barrage of missiles yet, striking targets across the country and causing widespread blackouts, AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Video published by a Ukraine presidential aide showed a 5-story, apparently residential building on fire in Kyiv. The city mayor says 3 others were struck too, and that air defense units shot down missiles. The strikes followed air raid sirens in the capital and break what has been a period of comparative calm since previous waves of drone and missile attacks several weeks ago. The strikes also follow what have been days of euphoria in Ukraine, sparked by the retaking of Kherson. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
The United States on Tuesday imposed sanctions on companies and people accused of being involved in the production of transfer of Iranian drones that have been used by Russian in attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Russia has procured drones from Iran that have been used to attack cities and power infrastructure in Ukraine. Iranian military entities and industries are already under heavy U.S. sanctions over Tehran's nuclear development program. This is VOA News. Tens of thousands of Brazilians wearing yellow and green, the colors of the national flag, gathered Tuesday in different locations to protest President Jair Bolsonaro's defeat in last month's election and asking for the armed forces to intervene. In Rio de Janeiro, Brazilians flocked to a regional military facility to denounce what they see as an unfair or stolen election, defying a recent Supreme Court order to free up roads and public spaces. 2 weeks have passed since former leftist President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva beat Bolsonaro in one of the tightest presidential races with just over 50.9% of the votes. Cuba and the United States are making progress in talks aimed at curbing a migration crisis that saw a record number of Cubans arrive at the U.S. border last year. But those advances are not enough to stem the tide, Cuba's top diplomat said in talks on Tuesday. Deputy Foreign Minister told reporters that despite steps in the right direction, the United States had yet to address the root of the problem. The U.S. State Department said the talks provide, quote, an opportunity for discussion on mutual implementation of migration accords signed between the two countries. Following the midterm elections, both U.S. political parties are gearing up for the new year. The AP's Ed Donahue reports.
With Democrats remaining in the majority, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is celebrating the midterm results.
We had a great, happy, and spirited discussion in our caucus. Democrats are ready and eager and united.
For the Republicans, Florida's Rick Scott is mounting a long-shot bid to unseat the Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell.
I have the votes. I will be elected. The only issue is whether we do it sooner or later.
Scott's unexpected challenge to McConnell comes as Republicans are wrestling over a lackluster performance in the midterms when the party out of power historically sees significant gains. Ed Donahue, Washington.
Donald Trump is set to launch a new White House bid in a few hours from a ballroom at his Florida resort, hoping to box out potential Republican rivals and return his false claims of election fraud to the center of U.S. politics. The United Nations says the world's population is reaching the 8 billion mark on Tuesday. The projection came in a UN report released in July that said much of the growth expected between now and 2050 is coming from just 8 countries. Half of those are in sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria, Congo, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. Find more on our website, voanews.com, or follow us on the VOA mobile app. I'm Joe Ramsey. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The United States and its allies on Wednesday criticized Russia in the United Nations Security Council over missile attacks on Ukraine in a meeting a day after a missile NATO said was a stray fired by Ukraine's air defenses crashed into Poland. Poland said the missile was probably not a Russian strike, easing international fears the war could widen. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky disagrees, saying there was no doubt the missile was not Ukrainian. Washington's ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, told the Security Council it really doesn't matter.
This tragedy would never have happened but for Russia's needless invasion of Ukraine and its recent missile assaults against Ukraine's civilian infrastructure.
Adding, quote, Ukraine has every right to defend itself against this barrage. The Pentagon's top officer says he tried to get in touch with his Russian counterpart after the missile strike in Poland. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley says his staff reached out.
Attempts were made, no success.
Which raises concerns about high-level communications with Moscow in a crisis. At a news conference, Milley says it appears unlikely either Russia or Ukraine will score a decisive military victory. That, plus a potential winter slowdown in fighting, could lead to talks on ending the war. Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin says that's not up to the U.S.
The Ukrainians are going to decide that, and not us.
Sagar Meghani, Washington.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called for the African Union to be included as a permanent member of the G20 on Wednesday. This is VOA News. Brazilian President-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is promising to combat deforestation when he assumes office on January 1st.
Tem a obrigação de conversar com todos em igualdade de condições.
The Silva president between 2003 and 2010 is participating at the UN Climate Summit in Egypt known as COP27. In his first public appearance on Wednesday, Da Silva says his administration would make combating deforestation a priority. He also said he would suggest to UN officials that the climate summit in 2025 be held in the Amazon. The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk urged Wednesday Sudanese factions to reach an agreement to end worsening political and economic crises which deepened following last year's military coup.
Any transition is delicate, and in Sudan, we are at a particularly delicate stage of this transition.
Turk in Khartoum concluding his first official visit to Sudan. Sudan has been rocked by turmoil since Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan led a military coup in October last year that ousted the mainstream civilian bloc from a power-sharing government and triggered widespread international condemnation. Meanwhile, former U.S. President Donald Trump's suspension from Facebook and Instagram will stand for now despite his candidacy for president. Meta, which owns both platforms, said Wednesday it had no plans to lift the ban on Trump, which was imposed after the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Trump may not have to wait long to return, however, as the suspension will be reconsidered in January. Over on YouTube, a ban imposed following the January 6th attack remains in place. Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, has criticized the platform's decision to boot the former president, but said it will be up to a content moderation committee to decide whether to reinstate banned users. The Australian government has confirmed that Novak Djokovic has been granted a visa to compete in the Australian Open in January, a year after he was deported over his stance against COVID-19 vaccination. The 21-time Grand Slam champion had his visa canceled on public interest grounds on January 14th and lost an appeal against deportation in the full federal court. Immigration Minister Andrew Giles says he's approved Djokovic's application to revoke the cancellation decision because the grounds don't exist anymore. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey.
This is VOA News. Reporting via remote, I'm Jeff Custer. Ukrainian officials said Russian airstrikes resumed Thursday throughout the country, once again targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Reporting from Kyiv Thursday, correspondent Anna Chernikova gave an update to VOA's Flashpoint program.
Ukrainians were attacked by at least 18 missiles from Russian Federation and also by the drones. We know that 4 to 6 missiles were destroyed by Ukrainian air defense, and also 5 drones were destroyed. So in terms of the attacks, the worst hit and the main hit happened in Dnipropetrovsk region. The main purpose of these attacks today were actually the critical infrastructure of the gas sector of Ukraine. And this was again confirmed by the Ukrainian officials.
Chernikov also reported a Ukrainian team will be traveling to Poland to investigate the scene of the missile strike Tuesday that killed 2 people there. The UN and Poland say they don't believe it was a Russian attack, but rather a Ukrainian-launched air defense missile that accidentally struck a warehouse in the eastern Polish city of Javodów. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky at first denied the charge, and the Russians insinuated this had all been a ploy by NATO to expand the war. Ukrainian and Turkish officials announced Thursday an agreement allowing for the export of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea will continue for another 4 months under its current terms. The extension came days ahead of the potential expiration of the original deal that Turkey and the UN brokered in July to allow for the resumption of grain shipments that had been interrupted by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres Thursday applauded the development and said the UN is fully committed to making sure it works. This is VOA News. U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced Thursday she will not seek a leadership position in the new Congress, making way for a new generation of leaders after Democrats lost control to the House of Representatives in the midterm elections last week. Associated Press Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Pelosi says she remembers her first visit to the House floor when she was 6.
Never would I have thought that someday I would go from homemaker to House Speaker.
She was the nation's first female speaker, and after nearly 20 years in Democratic leadership,
for me, the hour's come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus.
As Democrats prepare to be the minority party, Pelosi says she will not run for leadership re-election, but will keep her seat representing San Francisco. Democrats cheered as Pelosi arrived in the chamber before her remarks and lined up one by one to greet her afterward. Sagar Magani, Washington.
A court in the Netherlands Thursday convicted 3 men in absentia of mass murder for their role in the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, which crashed in eastern Ukraine in 2014, killing all 298 passengers and crew on board. The Boeing 777 was traveling from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur when it was shot down in July of 2014 in the early months of the war between Ukraine-backed rebels and Ukrainian forces in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. The bodies of the passengers and crew were strewn alongside the smoldering wreckage in the sunflower seeds around the tiny village of Habrov, close to the Russian border. The victims, mostly Dutch, were from 17 countries and included 80 children. For the families of the victims Thursday, it was a difficult day. Jordan Withers lost his uncle in the incident.
You've got to remember, while we were in court today, we still have to go home and sit at a dinner table without our loved ones, and I think that's never going to go away, that feeling that, no matter what a court says or what happens in court, that's still always going to be the case. And
when he celebrates his birthday Sunday, U.S. President Joe Biden will become the United States' first president to turn 80 years old while in office. However, Biden does not even register in the top 10 list of the world's oldest current serving leaders, which is led by the 89-year-old president of Cameroon, Paul Biya, and includes 82-year-old Queen Marguerite of Denmark. The White House has not released plans for Biden's birthday celebration, but it's expected to remain low-key and with family along the lines of Biden's past birthdays. Biden's age is garnering attention because he would be 86 by the time a second four-year term ends, should he win the 2024 presidential election. Reporting via remote, I'm Jeff Custer. This is VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Ukraine's prime minister said on Friday successive waves of Russian missile strikes have crippled almost half of Ukraine's energy system as heavy fighting raged in areas in the east and south. President Volodymyr Zelensky said earlier about 10 million people were currently without power in a country with a pre-war population of about 44 million.
Увесь день триває ліквідація наслідків.
The United Nations has warned of a humanitarian disaster in Ukraine this winter due to power and water shortages. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and leaders from Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada vowed to pressure North Korea as they held urgent talks Friday on Pyongyang's launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Japan said the missile landed in its waters but was capable of striking the U.S. mainland. Harris met the leaders of close U.S. partners hours later on the sidelines of an Asia-Pacific summit in Bangkok and condemned the launch, calling for North Korea to, quote, stop further unlawful destabilizing acts.
On behalf of the United States, I reaffirm our ironclad commitment to our Indo-Pacific alliances. Together, the countries represented here will continue to urge North Korea to commit to serious and sustained diplomacy.
The launch follows weeks of spiraling tensions with North Korea, which U.S. intelligence believes is preparing a seventh nuclear test. UN climate talks that were supposed to end Friday were extended by a day in an effort to break a deadlock over creating a fund for developing countries devastated by the fallout from global warming. This is VOA News. A UN official on Friday said she hoped a shipment of Russian fertilizer exports to Malawi would lead to a further easing of backlogs in European ports, a deal aimed at addressing global food shortages by helping Ukraine export its agricultural products from Black Sea ports was extended for 4 months on Thursday, though Russia said its demands had yet to be addressed.
We hope that the next destination of the fertilizers will be West Africa, that has been very affected by the affordability crisis of fertilizers.
Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of the UN Conference on Trade and Development, who oversees the fertilizer negotiations, said a shipment is set to sail from the Netherlands in a few days. Kenya's former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, and Rwanda's president, Paul Kagame, have agreed on the need for M23 rebels to cease fire and withdraw from captured territories in East Congo, Kenya's Foreign Affairs Ministry said on Friday. M23 rebels have waged several offensives in East Congo this year, prompting army responses that have displaced thousands of civilians. The unrest ignited diplomatic tensions between Congo and neighboring Rwanda, which Congo accuses of backing the group. Rwanda denies the accusation. Pfizer says its updated COVID-19 booster shot may offer some protection against new mutations of the variant. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
The original vaccine had been tweaked to address the Omicron variants, and the dominant one at the time was BA.5. While this new shot does produce an immune response for that variant, it appears it can also target 4 additional Omicron subtypes, including the worrisome BQ.1.1, a 9-fold increase in antibodies against that variant compared to only a 2-fold increase from the original shot. But more studies are needed, and this data released by Pfizer has not been peer-reviewed. I'm Jackie Quinn.
The day after U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced she would step aside, Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York announced his own history-making bid Friday to become the first black American to helm a major U.S. political party in Congress as leader of the House Democrats. The 52-year-old Jeffries gave nod to the quote-unquote legendary figures before him, Pelosi and her leadership team, while encouraging his colleagues to embrace this, quote, once-in-a-generation opportunity to further unleash our full potential as a team. Find more at voanews.com. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin warned Saturday that Russia's invasion of Ukraine offers a preview of a world where nuclear-armed countries could threaten other nations, and said Beijing, like Moscow, seeks a world where might makes right. Austin made the remarks at the annual Halifax International Security Forum, which attracts defense and security officials from Western democracies. Russian officials have raised using tactical nuclear weapons after suffering massive setbacks in the nearly 9-month invasion of Ukraine. Austin said Putin's war of choice shows the whole world the dangers of disorder, and said nuclear weapons need to be responsibly controlled and not used to threaten the world. Austin said NATO support for Ukraine is a fight for global freedom.
Free people always refuse to replace an open order of rules and rights with one dictated by force and fear. And that's why Ukraine matters. Because rules matter, sovereignty matters, and freedom matters.
Malaysia has tumbled into fresh political turmoil after Saturday's tightly contested general election delivered a hung parliament. There was no clear winner and a surprising surge of support for an Islamist party. Opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim's Reformist Alliance secured the biggest gain with 82 out of 220 parliamentary seats. That's far short of a majority. Trailing close behind was former Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin's bloc. Both Anwar and Muhyiddin have claimed they have support to form a government, but the nation's king will have the final say. From Washington, this is VOA News. Leaders from around the Asia-Pacific region called for an end to Russia's war in Ukraine and pledged to steer the region's economies toward sustainable growth. AP correspondent Karen Chamas reports.
The declaration issued by APEC leaders acknowledged that member states had differing views on the war, but noted that the conflict can have significant consequences for the global economy. The meeting wrapped up a flurry of events throughout the region that have given leaders a chance to meet face-to-face, a rare occurrence after years of pandemic precautions. IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva acknowledged new global challenges.
We met here in Thailand 3 years ago last, and since then the world has changed by events none of us foresaw coming at that time, the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine.
I'm Karen Chamas.
Security sources and a local government official say Islamic State group militants attacked an Iraqi army position in the northwestern governorate of Kirkuk, killing 4 soldiers. The sources said IS fighters early on Saturday took the soldiers' weapons and communications gear and left the scene. It was the first such attack in nearly a year. In January, Islamic State gunmen broke into a barracks in the mountainous Al-Azim district where they killed a guard and shot dead 11 soldiers as they slept. Now that the U.S. midterm ballots have been cast, the certification appears to be going smoothly so far, although there are exceptions in the U.S. state of Arizona. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn.
The vote certifications so far have been orderly, even in places where there had been suspicions about election fairness. All 17 counties in Nevada certified their results, despite earlier accusations of election conspiracies, and an effort to eliminate voting machines altogether. It's the same story in New Mexico, despite months of pressure on election officials. But in Arizona's Cochise County, the 2 Republicans in control delayed their certification this week, after hearing from conspiracy theorists who say the vote counting machines are not certified, even though the state elections director says that claim is false. Also in Arizona, gubernatorial candidate Carrie Lake, who lost her election, is refusing to concede. I'm Jackie Quinn.
In its intelligence update Saturday, Britain's defense ministry said that on Wednesday, Russia held its largest ever debt issuance in a single day. And President Joe Biden's granddaughter, Naomi Biden, and her fiancé, Peter Neal, got married on the White House lawn on Saturday. From Washington, I'm Marissa Melton with VOA News.